Hi there, guys. Mr. Martin here. Thanks again so much for joining me. Now, in this video, what we're going to be looking at are the individual factors and how they can be used to explain why people conform, or moreover, why people conform in certain situations but not in others. Now, to actually start tackling this idea, we have to ask ourselves one simple question here. 75% of people conformed at least once in Ash's trial. And what this means is that a quarter of people who were sampled maintained their independence and did not conform at any point. So, what was it about those people that perhaps led them not to follow the group and conform? We can only offer guesses at this point, but we can split up these factors into 5: age, personality, sex, cognition, and culture. Now, this links into the kind of general idea normally in psychology that behavior is based around these individual differences. So not only can we apply these to conformity, you could also apply these to your other psychology learning as well. But let's use them for conformity today, starting off, of course, with age. Does the age of participants influence how much they conform? The answer seems to be yes, it does, ever so slightly. So what we have here is a little bit of research that says conformity is most likely between the ages of 10 to 14. That sounds counterintuitive. 10 to 14 is where you start becoming a teenager, your hormones are flowing, you're becoming a bit more moody, you want to disobey, but it turns out that's when you're actually most likely to follow the group. We're talking friends, peers, perhaps colleagues at this time. After the age of 14, the ability to dissent rises, so you're less likely to conform, more or less, the older that you get. We have to be careful here because we could also class age as a situational factor. For example, if you are in a group of, let's say, toddlers, are you going to conform to them? Well, they're much younger than you, so pretty much, of course, they're not. They want to play with their dinosaurs or with their train sets, and you don't really want to. I would actually quite like to play with a train set, but well, there you go. Age can also be classed as a situational factor, so we have to be careful with this one. Second individual factor is all about personality. So this is about how people differ at the fundamental levels. Does that affect conformity? Answer is yes. Sante and Maslach, way back in 1982, point out that people who have higher self-esteem, the people who think a little bit more of themselves, they're more comfortable with their own personalities, these people are less likely to conform. We also find here that people who value control are less likely to conform. These are the people who like to take control of their own lives. They don't like to be led. They don't like following leaders. That's research from Berger back in 1992. And perhaps more generally, what we find is that type A personalities are more likely to conform. This is a type A person up here. There's relatively few of them compared to type B. That will be most of you guys. I'm sure we all know someone who's type A, however. A type A personality, competitive, sometimes aggressive, really likes to be right in the thick of things. They love to strive for a goal. They're always on the move. Type A personalities don't like to be hemmed in, but more counterintuitively, they crave control. They absolutely love being told what to do. So these people are much more likely to conform. Quite interesting. Moving on to sex next. By this we mean, of course, gender. Which of the two genders is more likely to conform? We have to be a little bit careful here, but the research would suggest that women are more likely to conform than men. Mori Arai point out something in their interesting Japanese study, that women conform whereas men simply don't. Eagley in the 1980s suggests that this happens because women tend to take a more communal role and promote harmony within their group, while men are more comfortable maintaining their independence. However, again, we have to be very careful here because this research might just depend on culture at the time. The behavior of males and females varies very much over time, and it depends on where you are in the world. Some older studies of gender difference and conformity may be culturally biased, they might be outdated, while even more recent ones, such as Mori Arai in 2010, we can't be generalized to all cultures. So we have to be really, really careful with this finding that women conform more than men. It might just be a statistical artifact. We don't know. Cognition comes next. Now remember, cognitive psychology, it's all about how you process information inside your head. So how do you interpret the situation that you're in, and how does that link to conformity? Turns out that differences in thought process, differences in cognition, does have some sort of effect on cognition. In one of Ash's follow-up studies in 1955, he actually asks people, why did you conform in that experiment? And what some people tell him is that they genuinely doubted their own judgments. They were convinced that the line they were seeing as the matching one was not correct, so they must have got it wrong. So these people were doubting their inner processing. Whereas other people that Ash was asking knew they were right, but they conformed simply to avoid disapproval. They didn't want to look like a fool in front of the group. Here we have two elements where people have interpreted what they're seeing differently. So cognition might also affect conformity. Lastly, we're going to look at culture here. Now, one of the great problems while interpreting the classic research like Ash or Sharif or Janice is that they primarily studied young American men in the mid-20th century. And their findings can't necessarily be generalized beyond that cultural context. A culture that has since been described as highly conformist. That is no good if we're trying to apply it to the rest of the world. What we tend to see, however, if we do contemporary research into conformity, is that if you have a collectivist culture, Central America, Mexico, Panama, that sort of area, also Southeast Asia, so that's places like Japan and China, these places tend to conform more than more individualist cultures. These are most Western countries. Smith and Bond actually point out in 1993 that apparently Belgium has the lowest conformity in the world and Fiji has the highest. Quite interesting, I think. Now, we're going to look at some primary research here. We've mentioned Mori Arai already. This is a nice key study to try and look into individual differences in conformity. Now, what they do here is quite interesting. They want to replicate Ash's procedure, but they importantly don't want to use confederates. They don't want to tell anybody what to do. They want everybody in the experiment to be naive. How do they do this? Well, what they do is they give each of their participants specially filtered glasses. They kind of look like 3D glasses that you'd wear to the cinema. And what these glasses meant was that each of them perceived a different correct answer. So they go in groups of 4. 3 of them see a line as matching one on the right hand side. Let's say it's line A. Line A is the correct answer. Whereas one of them in this group of 4, who's sitting second to last, sees a completely different answer. So this means we have a natural majority of 3 and a natural minority of 1. We haven't told them to say the wrong answer. They both think that they are correct. What do they find out in this one? Well, they find that conformity is more or less in line with Ash's results, but only for women. Male participants, for whatever reason, did not conform. They tried it again with the ally, similarly to Ash, and that led to a small reduction in conformity. But realistically, what we're interested in here is that females conformed exactly the same as Ash did, and males did not. When we're evaluating this study, guys, this is a very good one for explaining gender differences, at least in terms of social roles. Now, we could maybe look at this in terms of culture or generational changes. So how is the generation changed from the 1950s to now? How is the culture different between Japan and America? There's quite a lot of differences we can make there. Another thing we can look at here, and I'm going to leave it up to you to decide whether this is a strength or a weakness, is that the participants were actually friends with one another. Compare that to Ash's experiment where none of them knew each other. So this one means they all know one another. Now, Mori and Arai believe that that was a strength of the study because that's how we conform in real life to our friends or acquaintances. It's more realistic. But is there anything we can say about that in terms of weaknesses? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Key concepts here then, guys, we've looked at individual factors today. So these are the factors within the participant's head or something about them individually which might make them more or less likely to conform. Age, remember 10 to 14 is the critical era. After that, tends to go down a little bit. Personality, type A people tend to conform more, whereas people with high self-esteem conform less. Sex, well, again, we have to be careful with this, but it seems that women, for whatever reason, are more likely to conform than men. Maybe. Cognition, it depends on how you think about the problem that leads you into conforming. And finally, culture. Now we have to compare Ash's experiment 1951 with more contemporary research to get a more accurate view of what conformity actually is. That's everything for today, guys. Hope that was reasonably helpful for you. This will be the second last video into conformity. We've got one more to go, and then we're going to start on obedience. So hopefully that was great for you guys, and we'll see you again next time. Cheers!